Penn State is going to blow out UCLA.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's preview and make some predictions for Penn State versus UCLA. We'll talk about what Penn State's going to do when they have the football and UCLA when they have the football. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. I'd really appreciate it if you left a like on this episode. More importantly, be a part of the discussion down in the comment sections. If you have a score prediction, let me know your final score prediction and your reasoning behind it. And that's how we start off these preview episodes. I give you my final score prediction, my reasoning for it, and then go through the individual game plans by both teams if you are new to these preview episodes. And I'm going to go with Penn State 42, UCLA 10. The spread is teetering back and forth between 27.5, 28.5, but I still think Penn State is able to cover that, and I think the total goes over as well. We've seen some movement on the total. It's settled in at about 46.5. This battle is won by Penn State in the trenches. Penn State is much better on the offensive line versus UCLA's defensive line, and vice versa. UCLA's offensive line might be one of the weakest position groups for offensive line in the entire country, and Penn State's defensive line is proving to get better and better week in, week out. So if you're UCLA, pick your poison when you're going up against Penn State's offense. Trying to sell out for the run, you're going to open up lanes in the passing game, and UCLA's pass defense isn't its strong suit. So if you want to stack the box and try to take away the physicality that Penn State's going to bring, they showed that against Illinois. They had a dominant victory, even though the box score and the scoreboard didn't show that. But if you look at the analytics, Penn State actually had the best margin of victory, the margin of dominance against a top 20 Big Ten team. So for UCLA that has a rather weak pass rush, Drew Aller is going to have all day to sit back there, read a book, pick apart the defense, find the open wide receivers, or you can try to defend the pass, leave extra guys in the secondary, and let Singleton and Allen run the football all over you. I think that UCLA is going to they are going to game plan to try to stop the run because they saw what Penn State did recently against Illinois in that game. That's the most recent tape. Drew Aller didn't have his best game. And I think we're kind of forgetting that Drew Aller is better this season. Even though I was critical of him in his last game, I think that he is still better this season and has taken a step forward. UCLA's strength is, if you want to point to a strength for the Bruins, the run defense isn't actually bad. It allows 3.5 point yards per carry. That's actually top 35 in the nation. Pretty respectable. Pass defense, though, 8.5 yards per attempt. That is bottom 80. Close to the 90s. It is not good for UCLA. I think Penn State's pass game will show a lot of progress in this game. Now, the run game will do well as well because the game's going to get out of reach. Penn State's going to build a margin of victory over UCLA and basically just kind of work the clock, run out the clock, get some of the backups in. So pick your poison for UCLA. You're kind of doomed one way or another if you're the Bruins defense. If you do want a game plan for the pass and Drew Aller, you're going to have to deal with Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen for a front seven, a defensive line particularly, that's just not that good. Then I turn to UCLA's quarterback situation here. So Ethan Garbers has been the starter this season for the Bruins, but he did not practice on Tuesday. And he is going to try to play. So I guess there's a sense of optimism here that the starter's going to play. But it's the backup, Justin Martin, that might be turned to at some point in this game. I think that, and from what I've gathered from my counterpart over at Locked On UCLA, is that there is a clear gap between who is the better quarterback, Ethan Garbers versus Justin Martin. And if Justin Martin plays a majority of this game, that is not good news, and this score could really get out of hand if Justin Martin has to play an extended amount of time for the Bruins at that quarterback position. UCLA's offense just really can't do much of anything. to this point. Maybe 10 points is too generous. I think there is going to be a garbage time touchdown in there because Penn State is going to use this spot to get more backups, more true freshmen, valuable playing time before they go to USC, before they go back on the road to Wisconsin, before they play that game, Ohio State, in just a matter of a few weeks here. UCLA's offense, whether it is Garbers, whether they do have to turn to Martin, the offense isn't that overpowering. New head coach, new offensive coordinator. Chip Kelly just abruptly leaves them. They turn to Eric Bieniemy, who has had a great NFL career and goes to the college ranks here. His system's a little complicated from what we've gathered. It's just a little too much. So it's still taking time for the team to understand Eric Bieniemy's system. And I think that holds them back in this game against Penn State as well. The biggest key here is that this is just not an ideal setup for UCLA. Another plane trip across the country. They've gone to Hawaii, they've gone to LSU, and then they got to fly back home to California in between. I am not envious of the Bruins' schedule to go from LA to Death Valley to, and not in this order, but out to Hawaii and then back to LA. Then you got to go to the East Coast and play a noon kickoff. What is significant about that? Fox Big Noon is really not doing UCLA any favors. What that does is it makes a Bruins team that's already exhausted to begin with, is already dealing with injuries to begin with, and you have to start a game at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Your bodily clock is set to Pacific time, and you got to play a football game against a physical Penn State team after you've gone through the gauntlet. So you could argue and say, well, UCLA is battle tested. They played the second toughest schedule. According to Pro Football Focus, they have played the second toughest schedule to this point. I don't disagree with that. What I want to talk about and what I will agree with is that UCLA has really been through it here, and they don't get any favors from the networks here. So a noon kickoff, 9 a.m. Pacific time for the Bruins, plane trips all over the country. They're not battle tested. They are battle exhausted between LSU and then they just played Oregon. Indiana beat them down out in Los Angeles. Penn State is now this is where Penn State has an opportunity to capitalize on this because they need to continue to build out depth. And that's where I think some of those points come in the fourth quarter. This very well could be a shutout going into the fourth quarter, but unlike a Kent State, this is a Power 4 conference team. This is a team that players that are talented. They were recruited by some of the other best schools in the country. They're at UCLA, and they are going to score points against Penn State's backup. So that's why I think it's 42-10 as the final score. If you also want to look to something else, Pro Football Focus has UCLA currently as the fourth worst team in the country. I think that does have to do with the daunting schedule that they played. Again, Oregon, Indiana is much better than they've given them credit for. They didn't really have an emphatic win against Hawaii. They should have beat Hawaii convincingly, and that was only a 3-point victory. And then they lost to a ranked LSU team. So I think the results kind of hinder, because I do think this is a better UCLA team than people are giving them credit for. The new coaching staff, they did lose some key players from a season ago because this was a top 10 defense. Formerly, this was a top 10 defense. Chip Kelly just abandons them to take a demotion to Ohio State. And now this is what the Bruins are left with. Tough opponents, a tough road trip. This is just not an ideal spot for the Bruins. It's a great spot for Penn State to continue to show that they are a college football playoff contender, that they can build out their depth and get some key backups, key freshmen into the game against fairly comparable talent here. UCLA is not a bad team, even though the results might say otherwise. This is valuable experience for a Dejan Lane, an Anthony Specca, even guys who are veterans, an Elliott Washington, a Dakari Nelson. Flip it over to the offense, a Luke Reynolds, Cooper Cousins. We're going to talk about all of that in the upcoming segments here. Again, my final score prediction is Penn State 42, UCLA 10. And if it is so, in fact, that Justin Martin is the quarterback for half of the game, majority of the game, 4 quarters of the game, this score could really get out of hand and Penn State could win by an even larger margin of victory. So I'm telling you that I feel confident about Penn State's spread here. I think they cover, whether it's 27-28, I think they cover that. And I think Penn State is going to be able to push the total over almost by itself, especially if UCLA is forced to make a quarterback change here. And it's unfortunate because I like Ethan Garbers. I'd like to see UCLA be at full strength, but that's just not the case in this situation. And again, the networks aren't helping them out. But what is Penn State going to do when they have the football? We talked about how UCLA is going to have to pick its poison. Aerial attack or ground and pound by Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. We'll discuss what the Nittany Lions will do when they have the football on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has released a new feature called Gametime Picks. It makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier than before. Gametime Picks filters out all of the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. And I have the tickets on Gametime pulled up in front of me for Penn State versus UCLA. Remember, this is a stripe out, so if you do get tickets to this game, be aware of what section, the color for your section that you have to wear for the stripe out. But on Gametime here, there's already the top deals listed in front of me. I have all-in pricing switched on, so there's no surprise fees at checkout. And if you want seats fit about 40-yard line seats on the west side of the stadium, lower sideline, all in pricing for 2 tickets, $89 a piece. If you're looking for the lowest price, you get north end zone upper deck seats for $58 a piece. Those are some pretty good deals on Gametime. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That code again is LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. When Penn State has the football, they can attack this UCLA defense in a lot of ways because UCLA's defensive line is not going to provide much resistance here. The battle is going to be dictated by the trenches on both sides of the football for the Nittany Lions and the Bruins. Penn State's offensive line is better than UCLA's defensive line, and vice versa when we talk about that in the final segment about how UCLA's offensive line is just not that good in itself as well. So the battle up front is key here, and Penn State can do whatever it wants. Protect Drew Aller, create a pocket for him, allow the time for routes to develop, receivers to get open, and then if UCLA has to make an adjustment here, then you can just, here's Nicholas Singleton, here's Katron Allen, try to stop them with the power run game. And that's Penn State's identity now. It's crazy to think that Penn State with Joe Moorhead and then Ricky Ronnie and then earlier from Mike Yurcich, that this was a team that wanted to spread it out, air it out as well, stretch the football field. And now they have this physical identity where they do want to run the ball 50, 60 times. Andy Kotelnicki played offensive line. He's an offensive line and tight ends guy. Now he's admitted that he will adapt his game plan to whatever it needs to be to win. But in this case for Penn State, they could win by running the ball 50 or 60 times. They could win this game by throwing it 50 or 60 times. You don't need to do either of them because Penn State, again, will win this game convincingly. I think it's the passing game that shines first before the ground game settles in because UCLA's weakness is truly pass defense. Again, they're giving up over 8.5 yards per attempt. That's one of the worst metrics in the country, and that's because UCLA, one of its biggest weaknesses overall, is that pass rush. They do not get after the quarterback. They do not cause havoc. They just uncomfortability. Drew Aller is going to have all day to sit back there and dissect the defense. The secondary can't cover forever. The defensive line is going to help them out in some sort of way. And I think that I am confident that Penn State's receivers can win its one-on-one matchups if UCLA does in fact decide to blitz, and they very well should. They very well should to try to get Drew Aller off of his game, but he's really not. His stats compared to a clean pocket versus when he has to roll out or he's under pressure are not that different. Drew Aller is still doing well enough when it comes to being under pressure versus not being under pressure. Drew should be able to go through his reads just fine, find wide open receivers. And I'm expecting, because he's been rather quiet recently after the breakout game against West Virginia, Trey Wallace should have over 100 yards. He has been quiet to this point. I think he's due for 100 yards and at least one touchdown. Now, I also do believe that Nicholas Singleton Singleton and Katron Allen should each have 100 yards in this game. So it's going to start with the passing game to build that margin, and then slowly but surely, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen are just going to run this game out by themselves. And why they're able to reach 100 yards, each of them, even though I think the passing game is going to have a nice day against UCLA, it's the fact that, again, UCLA is going to be tired. Can they play? They haven't shown it to begin with when they are well rested. UCLA hasn't been able to play a full game of 4 quarters of football, and then they got to do it at the equivalent of 9 a.m. Pacific time after a 6-hour plane trip from Los Angeles all the way to State College, Central Pennsylvania. Do you see my point here? So UCLA is not going to be able to handle Nicholas Singleton or Katron Allen in the fourth quarter when both of them are ready to go because they split the reps, and that's by design. So they are at 100% to attack the defense. And then this is where you miss Cam Wallace, because Singleton and Allen should not be going into the fourth quarter of this game against UCLA. The margin of victory is going to be well out of reach for UCLA. They're not going to be able to come back. And Cam Wallace being out long term, you would like to see him get those reps against a formidable opponent. And now you don't have that because you left him late in the game against Kent State. Hindsight's 2020. I understand that. Does Penn State play Quentin Martin? Maybe they should, in my opinion, but I doubt it because they want to preserve his red shirt. So do they feel, because James Franklin hasn't said we're changing his status from green to green light and we're going to play him in this game. They have said that they would like, the preference is to redshirt Quentin Martin. Now you don't have that, at least initial luxury anymore because Cam Wallace is unavailable and Penn State can't run its 2 running back system. They want to have Singleton and Allen on the field at the same time, and now they can't do that either because you have to preserve their health long term as well. But Quentin Martin, at any point in time, I think he should get the reps. You're going to have to say, forget about the red shirt. I understand the long-term benefits of it for Martin. I think he's going to be a co-starter next year when Wallace returns from his long-term injury. Singleton and Allen will move on. That's your dynamic duo for next year, and that's going to be a pretty good one at that. Quentin Martin needs the reps. This is a Power 4 team, even though they're not one of the better ones in the Big Ten. This isn't Kent State. This is UCLA with really good Division I talent. Quentin Martin should absolutely see the field, but I don't know. I can't speak to say what they are going to do. Luke Reynolds, Tysier Denmark. Cooper Cousins may start in this case. Sal Wormley left the game. JB Nelson left the game against Illinois. We could see other true freshmen in this game aside from Quentin Martin and his redshirt status. Luke Reynolds now has the green light. Tysier Denmark, they want to get him into the wide receiver rotation. They would like to preserve his redshirt as well. Cooper Cousins has the green light. He had that in the preseason. Cousins very well may start this game if Sal Wormley is not available and neither of JB Nelson. And even if they are, you want to protect them long term as well and make sure that they are healthy. So Cooper Cousins will absolutely, and I am confident that I can predict that he will get the start based on who's available. For UCLA's defense, they really good group a season ago. Again, this was a top 10 overall defense, top 10 run defense. DeAnton Lynn, former Penn State guy, now the defensive coordinator at USC. That's got to sting for the Bruins for him to go to USC like that. But they had stud players leave in the portal. Some of them remained. The defense is the better unit. The offense doesn't help them out. They don't play complementary football. Overall, the defense is just there all the time. They are too tired. They are too exhausted because of the amount of snaps that they play. The offense, they'll get the football and then immediately go 3 and out and boom, defense is back on the field. And that just doesn't do any favors to UCLA. They don't have a lot of depth here. Secondary is active in limiting the run. So that's part of the reason why the run defense is better, is because the defensive backs are not afraid to put their nose in the pile, go make a big play. I respect that. That is respectable of a group that is supposed to defend against the pass first. UCLA's defense is pretty physical across the board. They're not as good in coverage, which is why I think Penn State is able to have that mismatch there. Now, when UCLA has the football, it's not that much pretty on the other side either, but Penn State's defense should look forward to these players stepping up. And again, it starts in the trenches. So let's talk about how Penn State's defense will try to stop UCLA on the other side of this break. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. It's that convenient, it's that simple, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's all it takes is $5, and that's over at FanDuel.com. And if you look on FanDuel.com, you can see those lines for Penn State versus UCLA. It keeps going back and forth. There's some line movement. As it currently stands right now here with this episode, it is a 27.5 point spread for Penn State over UCLA, minus 27.5. The total is settled right now at 46.5. The lines have been pretty active here and could move again. If you like those lines, bet them now at FanDuel.com. Again, that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Remember, if you got a final score prediction, let me know it down in the comments section. I want to see if we're all on the same page here. I have Penn State winning 42-10 over UCLA, and it might be worse depending on the quarterback situation, which we will rehash here. But for Penn State's defense, Penn State will want to get its backups in, and I think that's where UCLA, again, Kent State wouldn't be able to do that, but UCLA, comparable talent on the roster. If Penn State's backups come in early, UCLA should be able to get a few points here towards the end of the game, some garbage time points. But back to the trenches, Penn State's defensive line can absolutely have a field day, especially if they sell out to take away the short pass. And expect Penn State to be better prepared for it. Bowling Green kind of gave them a reality check. UCLA, Eric Bieniemy is not stupid. He's a Super Bowl winning offensive coordinator. He knows what he's doing. He's going to try to attack Penn State in the same way. Tom Allen is going to be better prepared for it so that UCLA can't move the football. But Bowling Green, I honestly think that Bowling Green would give UCLA a run for its money. Honestly, I would not look past the Falcons in that hypothetical matchup against the Bruins here. Penn State will be better prepared this time around because they saw something similar, but there's not much UCLA can do, especially if the quarterback situation does not break in a favorable way for them. They need to have Ethan Garbers in at quarterback if they at least want to make this a game for the first half. Second half, it's going to be completely out of reach because, again, 9 a.m. Pacific time kickoff for the Bruins after taking a 6-hour plane trip over to central Pennsylvania here. Penn State should be able to force some turnovers, a few turnovers, actually. Ethan Garbers, if he is the quarterback, and that's why I don't know how much of a difference it's going to make. Again, I've heard that Justin Martin is not the answer and that it's going to make for a worse type of result in UCLA's case if he has to handle a bulk of the snaps at quarterback. But Garbers hasn't been world class for the Bruins either. 6 interceptions to 3 touchdowns. The Bruins, so I'll tell you who might be the star of the day for Penn State's defense. Zach Wheatley. I get the sense of a Zach Wheatley interception, maybe even 2. If UCLA's playing from behind, they're going to have to throw the football more. Zach Wheatley can definitely get his hands on the football, not once, but twice. I think that's my bold prediction here for Penn State, aside from what I said about the offense. The freshmen to watch in this game, talked about them offensively, mentioned them defensively. Dejon Lane needs to get in the game. He played the most snaps of any defender against Kent State. I anticipate the exact same kind of workload against UCLA. Same thing with Anthony Specka. Anthony Specka should be up there at the linebacker spot and get some additional reps as a true freshman. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Max Granville again. Penn State was very quick to get him into the game. However, he's definitely a redshirt candidate, so he's already played 2 games to this point. Penn State might be careful and not play him in this game. Maybe it's a toss-up. It's a toss-up because down the stretch, I don't know that he plays again. This would be his 3rd game. He would get that 4th one and could play in the postseason to still preserve his red shirt. But Max Granville certainly does not have the green light here. It's valuable experience. It gets him playing against better competition. Kent State versus UCLA's offensive line. That's a wide gap in talent there. And I'd like to see Granville because I have questions about him being undersized. He's currently 230. He should have been a high school senior. He's a college freshman right now. He's a little undersized, so I'd like to see him actually go up against bigger Big Ten tackles, Power 4 tackles in this case, to see what he can do as a high school senior, now turned immediately college freshman. But The goal here for Granville is to preserve his red shirt. My other players to watch, Dakari Nelson and Zion Tracy. Zion Tracy has been seeing more and more playing time, especially against Illinois. He was on the field a lot. He is that backup Lion to Cam Miller. And there's kind of this rotation to see, okay, which group of defensive backs is going to be the best? Can they move Jalen Reed back to the Lion position based on the performance of Dejon Lane? But if they can't do that, or they need to cycle and have this hybrid defensive look where they have multiple players playing different positions, Penn State needs to look to a player like Zion Tracy, who had the it was a costly penalty because it took 7 points off of the board for A.J. Harris's pick 6 against Illinois, but it didn't cost the result, of course. I would like to see more of Zion Tracy. There's a lot of promise there. The defensive backs talk highly about him. Same with his coach, the assistant coaches on staff in the secondary, Anthony Poindexter, Terry Smith. Zion Tracy is definitely, if he gets more playing time in this game, want to see some good action from him. Same thing with Dakari Nelson. James Franklin said in his latest press conference to start off Monday, leading through the week for UCLA, said that Dakari Nelson, that the light has gone on for him, that the change from safety down to linebacker has been really good for Nelson. He played a good bit against Illinois, saw him against Kent State. If that's the case for Dakari Nelson, he is a player to watch down the stretch because linebacker depth has always been in flux from the preseason to these first 4 games here to now moving forward. If Nelson can almost provide you some insurance that the linebacker group is going to be okay, especially with injuries to Adam DeLuca, for example, that is huge for Penn State. I'm looking forward to seeing what Dakari Nelson will do at the linebacker spot with a continued increased workload. Finish with UCLA's offense specifically. Quarterback situation, talked about Ethan Garbers. Veteran, second leading rusher in terms of utilization. He's got 27 carries for -1 yard. However, that has to do with the fact that he's pressured constantly and the sacks are counted against his rushing total. So he does have some dual threat ability. So does Justin Martin. Martin is a clear-cut dual threat quarterback, former 4-star in high school. He's very athletic. But from what I've gathered from Zach Anderson Yoxheimer over at Locked On UCLA is that there's just not a lot of confidence objectively in Justin Martin. The coaching staff might feel differently, but the way that Martin plays, he's not poised. He doesn't look comfortable when playing. He's still rather inexperienced. If he does play a majority of this game, it's not going to spell good news for the Bruins. The offensive line is not good. I've already mentioned how Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator, this offensive system is it's new, it's overly complicated, it's very pro style, and that's good, but that's going to take a year's time. I'm kind of silently rooting for Deshaun Foster as a new head coach and Eric Bieniemy back in the college ranks to have a path to success. Okay, I don't want to just see them crash and burn and fail. But because of what UCLA has gone from, where D'Anton Lynn leaves for USC, Chip Kelly up and leaves for Ohio State and takes a demotion. Like UCLA has really been through it here. UCLA, because of that pro system, can somewhat run the ball. Their air attack is a struggle. I've mentioned 6 interceptions to 3 touchdowns by the routine starter in Garbers. They don't have any superstar pass catchers, whether that's at wide receiver, whether that's at tight end, running backs out of the backfield. Here are the key players just to know for UCLA. It's starters. Running back TJ Harden, 41 carries, 125 yards, and a touchdown. Wide receiver Rico Flores Jr., 12 catches, 187 yards, and 1 touchdown. And then the tight end, Moliki Mataveo, 8 catches, 106 yards, no touchdowns. And why I circle Mataveo in this conversation as a key player is because Penn State did struggle against a tight end threat in Harold Fannin Jr. when it came to Bowling Green. If Penn State can figure that out and have Kobe King or have Tony Rojas play a good assignment against him, Mataveo just has some attention in the UCLA offense. Eric Bieniemy was obviously had to work with Travis Kelce, so he had that benefit of using a talented tight end in the offense. I wonder if Mataveo gets a couple of catches here and there against Penn State's defense. At the end of the day, this offense does not play complementary football. The defense is its strength because of the retained talent, and Deshaun Foster is a defensive type of coach. Eric Bieniemy kind of is in charge of the offensive system as a whole. They just don't sustain any drives. The starting quarterback is banged up, and this is an early start time for a West Coast team. A noon kickoff, 9 a.m. Pacific time. I think we're going to see a garbage time touchdown if Penn State does put in a lot of its backups. But overall, it's just going to be a rough day for UCLA, and it might even be worse depending on how banged up Ethan Garbers actually is. 42-10 is my final score. Penn State wins and covers that spread as long as it doesn't move and stays around that 27-28 mark. That'll do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions, and I really appreciate each and every one of you for checking out this episode. Please let me know your thoughts down in the comments section, key matchups you're looking for, key players on Penn State's side, most importantly, your final score prediction. I want to know if we're all on the same page here, that this is a blowout victory for Penn State, or maybe you think UCLA can have a nice day and surprise some people, including myself. I don't know. The situation just doesn't line up for UCLA. I'd really appreciate it if you left a like on this episode, share it with friends and family, and if you're not already, become an everydayer, subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And again, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. Remember, if you are attending the game, it is the official stripe out for Penn State versus UCLA. Plan accordingly. For your second listen and watch, check out Locked On College Football with host Spencer McLaughlin as he breaks it all down. Game recaps, game previews, the latest news and analysis for all your favorite college football teams. It's all in one place, going in depth, and that's why it's called Locked On College Football. It's available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.